They thought she was just a simple girl. But she was the forest keeper's granddaughter. Before I tell you this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe, because you won't believe how it ends. Her name was Anna. She was only 19, a quiet girl who loved the forest more than anything. Every morning she carried a small wicker basket and wandered into the woods to gather berries, herbs, and wildflowers. She had grown up among the tall pines and the whispering river. Her grandfather, the old forest keeper, taught her how to read the tracks of animals, where to find healing plants, and how to listen to the silence that warned of danger. She wore a simple white dress that brushed against the grass, her hair long and loose, her eyes calm like the surface of the lake. But there was a fire inside her, a strength inherited from her grandfather. She believed the forest was alive and that it protected those who respected it, but she never imagined that one summer morning, when the sun was still low and the dew sparkled on the leaves, she would cross paths with people who did not respect anything, the arrogant sons of wealthy men, who thought money gave them power over everyone they met. The boys came with their shiny boots, polished cars parked recklessly by the dirt road, laughing too loud for the quiet forest. They thought they owned the world because their fathers owned factories, hotels, and half the city. They saw Anna walking with her basket and smirked. One of them whistled, another called out to her. As if she were some servant, they blocked her path between the trees, their voices dripping with arrogance. "Pretty girl, what are you doing here all alone?" one sneered, reaching for her arm. But Anna stood still, her heart beating fast yet her gaze unshaken. She remembered her grandfather's words. Never fear those who shout the loudest, fear only those who move silently. She lifted her chin and said calmly, "This forest does not belong to you." They laughed at her words, pushing closer, but suddenly the air grew heavier, the birds went silent, and in the shadow of the pines a tall figure appeared, the forest keeper himself, her grandfather, his weathered hands holding an axe on his shoulder, his eyes like burning coals. The boys' laughter faltered, but it was already too late. The forest had chosen sides. The boys froze as the forest keeper stepped forward, each heavy footstep sinking into the damp ground like thunder. His voice cut through the air, low and steady, "Leave, now, while the forest still allows you." But pride burned in their young eyes. One of them smirked and tried to laugh it off. "Old man, don't scare us with your fairy tales." Yet his voice cracked. The axe glinted as the keeper set it down slowly, the blade catching the pale light. He didn't raise it, he didn't need to. The weight of his presence alone pressed into their chests. Anna stood behind him, her breathing calm now, knowing she was safe. The forest itself seemed to lean closer, trees creaking as if listening. Then the keeper's eyes fixed on the boldest boy and he said words that chilled their veins. "I've buried worse than you beneath these roots." Silence fell. The boys looked at each other, their arrogance melting into fear, and one by one they stumbled back, their sneakers slipping on moss, muttering excuses, until only their retreating footsteps remained. Anna whispered, "Grandfather, you didn't even touch them," and he finally turned to her, his face softening. "The forest doesn't waste its strength on children, it just reminds them what waits in the dark." Anna watched the boys vanish into the trees, their laughter gone, replaced by the frantic rustling of branches breaking under their escape. The silence that followed felt heavier than any scream. The forest keeper stood still, his broad shoulders unmoving, his breath slow, as though he was part of the forest itself. She stepped closer, her hand almost brushing his rough coat. "Grandfather, what if they come back?" Her voice trembled not from fear of them, but from the power she had just witnessed. He turned his weathered face to her, his eyes the same shade as the deep woods. "If they come back, the forest will know their names," he said, calm as a stone. A crow cawed above, its wings slashing the sky. Anna shivered though no wind blew. She realized then that the keeper wasn't just a man, he was a promise, a warning, and a protector bound to the soil beneath their feet, and as the sun dipped low, casting the first shadows across the river, she felt the truth: this forest did not forgive arrogance, and those boys had only seen a glimpse of its patience. Anna lingered by the tree-line, her eyes fixed on the path where the spoiled boys had disappeared, her heart still pounding from the chaos. The forest keeper crouched near the roots of an ancient oak, running his hand across the bark as if listening to it breathe. "They will return," he said, not as a warning but as a certainty, "but this time the forest itself will meet them." His words made the air colder. Anna wanted to protest, to tell him those boys were nothing but loud cowards, but deep inside she knew, arrogance always came back for another try. The sound of the river swelled, its current roaring louder than before. As though stirred by his voice, Anna stepped closer, whispering, "And me? What if they try to harm me again?" He looked at her, not with softness but with something heavier, like the weight of roots deep in the ground. "You belong to the forest now," he said, "and the forest protects what is its own." She felt a shiver, but it wasn't fear, it was belonging, a dangerous, powerful belonging that tied her fate to his shadow and the whispers of the trees around them. The forest seemed to grow darker even though the sun was still hanging above the horizon, as if shadows thickened at the edges of Anna's sight. She followed the forest keeper deeper among the trees, their roots twisting like old bones, his steps silent, measured, almost inhuman. "They think money can buy them safety," he murmured, his voice blending with the whisper of leaves, "but here, their gold means nothing." Anna glanced at him, his profile sharp in the dimming light, not cruel but merciless, the kind of face that had seen too many trespassers. "And if they don't stop?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. His lips curved, not into a smile but into something far more unsettling. "Then the forest will feed." Suddenly, a branch snapped somewhere behind them. Anna turned, heart hammering. In the distance she saw the silhouettes of the boys returning, their laughter carrying through the woods, careless, drunk on arrogance. The keeper didn't flinch, instead he laid his palm against a nearby trunk, and the ground seemed to hum beneath her feet. Anna felt the pull of something ancient, something alive, and for the first time she realized, this was no ordinary man, and she was no longer just a frightened witness. She was part of the story the forest was about to write in blood and silence. Anna's breath caught as the laughter of the rich boys echoed louder, their silhouettes stumbling through the trees with bottles in hand. One of them shouted her name mockingly, thinking she had simply run off in fear, but the forest keeper raised a hand and the woods seemed to hush. Every bird, every rustle of branches fell into silence. The boys hesitated, confused. "What the hell?" one of them muttered, but the ground itself shifted beneath them, roots coiling up from the earth like snakes, their sneakers sinking into damp soil that clung like claws. Anna stepped back, torn between terror and fascination. She wanted to scream for them to run, but the keeper's gaze held her still, cold and commanding. "They took from the forest," he said, his voice low. "Now the forest takes back." The first boy tried to pull his leg free, but the root twisted higher, catching his ankle. The others laughed nervously until the laughter broke into shouts as more branches curled around their limbs, one by one dragging them down into the earth's shadow. Anna covered her mouth, trembling, unable to decide if she was watching justice or something darker, and when she dared to look at the keeper again, she saw that his eyes glowed faintly, like coals smoldering in the dusk. "Do you see now?" he whispered, stepping closer. "This forest protects itself, and those who belong to it." His hand brushed her arm, not cruel but heavy with meaning, and in that instant she understood, the choice was hers. To leave and pretend she saw nothing, or to stay and become bound to the forest forever. Anna's heart pounded so hard she thought the forest itself could hear it. The last of the spoiled boys were screaming now, their bravado gone, one of them sobbing for his father, but the forest did not listen. The roots pulled and the shadows swallowed, leaving only silence and the faint smell of damp earth. She staggered back. "You killed them," she whispered, her voice breaking, but the keeper shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "No," he said, his tone calm as though explaining a simple truth. "They were claimed." The word felt heavy, like it belonged to another world. She wanted to run, but her legs refused. The man's hand still lingered at her arm, warm against her chilled skin. "And you?" he asked, softer now, almost gentle. "Will you keep looking at me as if I'm a monster, or will you see what I really am?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The forest hummed low around them. Like 1,000 whispers beneath the leaves, she thought of her parents, of the world outside the woods, clean streets, safe beds, but then she thought of the way no one had ever looked at her the way he did, as if she was more than just a frightened girl, as if she belonged to something greater. "I don't know," she finally breathed, tears stinging her eyes. The keeper leaned closer, his shadow falling over her. "Then let the forest show you," he murmured, and the wind rose, carrying a chorus of voices through the branches. Voices that seemed to call her name, pulling her deeper, until she felt the line between fear and surrender blur into something dangerously close to desire. Anna's breath came in short bursts, her chest tightening as though the forest itself pressed against her. The shadows bent and twisted, and for a terrifying moment she thought she saw shapes, tall, faceless figures drifting between the trees, their movements too fluid to be human. She clutched the keeper's sleeve, not out of trust, but out of a desperate need not to be alone. "What are they?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned his head slowly, his eyes glinting like a predator's in the half-light. "They are what remains when arrogance meets the forest," he said, almost reverently. "They are warning, punishment, and reminder all at once." Anna shivered, the hairs on her arms rising, but as the figures faded, leaving only the endless stillness of the woods, she realized she no longer felt like prey. The terror hadn't left, but it had shifted, woven together with something sharper, stranger. The keeper's gaze softened, just slightly, as he leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing her ear. "You see now," he murmured, "this place isn't cruel, it's honest." She swallowed hard, her body torn between running and leaning into him. The silence stretched, and in it, her heartbeat sounded louder than ever. "Why me?" she asked, finally, her voice raw. His hand rose slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her damp cheek. "Because," he said, the single word rolling like thunder, "you're not like them, you never were." Anna froze at his words, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Not like them." The phrase rang in her ears as though it carried a weight she wasn't ready to bear. She stared at him, searching for something human in his eyes, but what she found was a depth that pulled at her, terrifying and magnetic all at once. "Then what am I?" she whispered, afraid of the answer. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not kind, but certain. You are the one the forest chose." The silence of the woods deepened, every sound swallowed by the trees, as if they too waited for her response. Anna shook her head, stepping back, her shoes sinking into the damp moss. "No, I didn't choose this, I didn't want any of this." Her voice cracked, but the keeper followed, his steps soundless, his shadow swallowing hers. "Wanting is a luxury," he said quietly, "surviving is a duty." His hand caught hers before she could pull away, his grip firm yet not cruel, and in that moment she realized it wasn't just his strength that held her, it was the forest itself, every branch, every root, every unseen thing threading around her like a net. She could barely breathe as his face lowered, close enough for her to feel the heat of his words. "And now, Anna, you belong here. Whether you run or not, the forest will always call you back." Anna's chest rose sharply as if the very air had turned heavy, her hand trapped in his felt both alive and bound. She wanted to scream, to tear herself free, but her voice died before it could reach her lips. The forest pressed closer, shadows thickening as if the trees leaned in to listen. "Chosen," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "By what right do you decide this for me?" His gaze didn't falter, a strange glint flickering in the depths of his eyes. "Not me," he said, almost reverently, "them," and he lifted his chin slightly toward the woods, and in that instant Anna swore she saw movement where there should have been none, branches twitching, a flicker of pale figures between the trunks, watching, waiting. Her blood turned cold, her knees weakening, but his hand steadied her, strong and unyielding. "Fight me if you must," he murmured, lowering his voice as though confiding in her alone. "But don't fight them, for they never lose." Her heart pounded against her ribs, every instinct screaming to run, yet every step she imagined taking felt already swallowed by roots and shadows, and deep inside, a truth whispered that perhaps she had never entered the forest by accident at all. Anna's breath hitched as the shadows seemed to sway with silent rhythm, the figures between the trees no longer illusions but outlines that pulsed faintly with a dim light. Her fingers twitched in his grasp, wanting to pull away, yet something inside her froze, as though the forest itself had already claimed her. What are they?" she whispered, the words nearly dissolving into the still air. He leaned closer, his voice low, almost gentle. "Guardians," he said, "spirits older than your world. They chose long before you were born." Anna's lips trembled, her body quaking with fear and disbelief. "I never asked for this," she gasped. "I don't want them." His grip tightened, but not cruelly, more like a chain she could not break. "You think choice matters?" he asked, eyes glinting with something between sorrow and fire. "None of us chose, Anna. We only survive them, or we vanish." As he spoke, a rustling moved through the woods like a sigh, and suddenly, from the corner of her eye, she saw one of the pale figures step fully into view, tall, faceless, yet radiating an aura that pressed against her skin. Her breath caught, her vision dimmed, and for the first time Anna understood that the forest had never been a place of escape, but a doorway, and it was already closing behind her. Anna staggered back as the faceless figure glided closer, its steps making no sound, only stirring the damp earth beneath. She could feel the cold radiance pouring off it, seeping into her skin, her veins, her thoughts. "No, stay away. You weren't supposed to be here tonight," he muttered, his voice breaking. "But maybe that's why the forest called you." His hand slid down to hers, clasping it with a strange, desperate warmth, and for one terrifying moment Anna felt the forest fall silent, as if waiting for her answer. Anna's chest rose and fell quickly, her breath catching in the silence that followed. The man's hand was firm in hers, yet trembling ever so slightly, betraying the fear he refused to voice. The faceless figure stopped just a few steps away, its form shifting like smoke held in place, and though it had no mouth Anna felt it whisper against her skin, cold as frost, "You don't belong here." The words weren't sound, they echoed directly in her skull, unraveling her courage thread by thread. She pressed closer to the man's back, clutching his shirt, and whispered, "Why me? Why is it after me?" He didn't turn, but his grip tightened. "Because you saw it," he said, his voice hoarse, "and once you see it, it never lets you go." The branches groaned louder, the forest bending as though bowing to the shadow, and Anna realized with dawning terror that every tree around them leaned toward her, not him. The faceless figure stretched out its arm, impossibly long, and the man finally spun around to face her, his eyes fierce, desperate. "If you want to live," he said, pulling her closer, "you have to choose me now, before it takes you." His words struck her like lightning, not just a plea but a command, and Anna's heart thundered in her chest as the shadow loomed, waiting. Anna's mind screamed at her to run, but her body felt locked in place, caught between the searing heat of his grip and the icy pull of the faceless figure. The man's eyes burned into hers, a storm of fear and something deeper, something that made her chest ache. "Choose me now," he'd said, as though her decision alone could shatter the shadow's hold. The faceless figure leaned closer, its presence pressing down on her lungs until she could barely breathe, and in its silence she heard the rush of water, the thrum of blood, the sound of her own heartbeat being stolen. She clung to the man's arms, whispering, "If I choose you, what happens to me?" His jaw tightened. "Then you're bound to me," he said, voice trembling, "and it can't take you. But if you hesitate, it will claim your soul." The air split with a creak like breaking bones as the shadow reached again, and Anna finally gasped, "Then take me." The forest shuddered at her words, leaves tearing loose and swirling like a storm, the shadow recoiling for the first time, its form dissolving into the trees, but Anna felt the man's arms tighten around her, a fire spreading through her veins that was both salvation and curse. Anna's body trembled as if the forest itself had crawled beneath her skin, the man's arms around her feeling less like safety and more like a binding spell. His breath was ragged against her ear, words breaking apart as though he was fighting something within himself. "You don't understand, now you're part of me." Her pulse hammered, her vision blurred, but the fire spreading through her veins made her feel alive in a way she had never known, sharp and dangerous, as though she'd swallowed lightning. She turned her head toward him, searching his face for truth, for mercy, but his eyes burned with something feral, something that belonged less to man than to the ancient, hungry woods that surrounded them. Behind them, where the faceless shadow had retreated, the air still writhed, faint outlines shifting like smoke, whispering her name in voices that weren't human. Anna clutched him tighter, torn between terror and surrender, and asked in a voice that cracked, "Then what am I now?" He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed, as though holding her was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. "You're mine," he said, but his voice wasn't just his anymore, it carried the echo of something older, something that promised both ruin and salvation. The forest fell silent, holding its breath, waiting for what she would do next. Anna's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths, her nails digging into his shirt as if anchoring herself to reality. The forest pressed in from all sides, branches groaning as though they too were alive, leaning closer to witness her choice. The man's lips hovered a breath from hers, trembling, torn between claiming and begging. "Say it," he whispered, his voice trembling like the crack of fire through dry wood, "say you're mine, and nothing can take you." Her throat form dissolving and reforming, hands stretching like smoke toward her, as if daring her to decide. Anna felt her body sway between two abysses, his warmth, the shadow's pull, and her heart thundered so hard it drowned out thought. She finally forced a whisper through trembling lips, "And if I don't?" His eyes snapped open, no longer fully his but glowing with the same eerie light that pulsed through the trees, and for the first time she realized he wasn't just fighting the darkness, he was part of it. The forest groaned louder, the ground vibrating beneath her feet, and Anna understood. Her answer would bind her to one fate or another, and there was no turning back. Her breath caught, the weight of his words crushing her chest like a stone. The air between them was molten, charged, as if the whole forest was holding its breath waiting for her choice. His glowing eyes pinned her, wild and desperate, but beneath that fire she saw the faintest flicker of fear, as though even he dreaded her answer. The shadow stretched longer, sharper, its hands brushing the edges of her vision, whispering promises she couldn't quite hear but felt in her bones. Anna's legs trembled, knees buckling, her heart pulling her toward the heat of his body even as her mind screamed to run. "Mine," he demanded, not softly this time but with the growl of someone who would rip the world apart rather than lose. Tears burned in her eyes, the night air cutting cold on her damp cheeks, and she finally realized, whether she said yes or no, she was already trapped. Her lips parted, her whisper slicing the silence like a blade, but before the word could fully leave her mouth the shadow surged forward, slamming into them both with a force that sent the forest screaming and the ground splitting beneath their feet. The ground cracked open, roots snapping and soil tumbling into the darkness below. Anna screamed as the forest itself seemed to tear apart, the shadow dragging them toward the abyss. He clutched her hand so tightly her bones ached, his voice a ragged snarl, "Don't let go, no matter what happens." Sparks of light flared from his chest, golden and furious, fighting against the black tide wrapping around them. Anna's hair whipped across her face, the wind howling like 1,000 voices, and through the chaos she saw it, the shadow wasn't faceless anymore. It had eyes, hollow and endless, and a mouth stretched wide in a grin that promised she would never leave. Her heart hammered, torn between terror and the fire in his grip, his strength burning into her palm. With a desperate cry she leaned closer, whispering the one word that sealed everything between them forever, as the world collapsed into either salvation or ruin. The abyss roared as if the entire forest was being swallowed, but Anna's whisper sliced through it, fragile yet sharp enough to reach him, "Stay." The word ignited something inside him, his eyes blazing gold as veins of light cracked across the ground, battling the darkness. The shadow screamed, its hollow grin twisting into fury as the golden fire licked its edges, forcing it back. He pulled Anna against his chest, wrapping her in that radiant shield, his voice breaking from the strain, "You're not taking her." The earth shuddered, trees bending like reeds in a storm, and for a moment it felt like the forest itself held its breath. Anna buried her face against him, clutching his shirt, and she swore she could hear his heartbeat louder than the chaos, each thud pulling her away from fear and into him. But then, silence. The shadow didn't retreat. It lunged, stretching taller than the trees, swallowing even the light. And she realized with a jolt of terror and awe, if they were to survive, he would have to give up more than light. He would have to give up himself. His hand trembled as he held her tighter, his light dimming with every breath, yet his eyes never left hers, as though anchoring himself to the only thing that mattered. The shadow towered above them, its arms unraveling like serpents, reaching, hungry, endless. He whispered, almost to himself, "If I fall, you live," and golden fire blazed through his veins again, brighter than before, too bright, so much that Anna's tears spilled as she shook her head. "No! Don't you dare leave me," she screamed, clawing at his chest as though her hands could keep him bound to this world. The shadow shrieked, recoiling as the firestorm erupted, scorching across the ground in a wave that split the forest in two. The trees cried, the river boiled, the night itself split open, but at the center of it all stood the two of them, his body a living pyre, hers the fragile heart refusing to let go. She buried her face against him one last time, but in the roar of light she couldn't tell if the arm around her was still his, or already just memory. The ground was still trembling, the last echoes of the light storm rippling through the earth like a dying heartbeat. Anna's body shook as she clung to the space where he had been, the warmth on her skin fading too quickly, too cruelly, until only cold air pressed against her. The forest was silent now, not even the cry of a bird, as though all of creation was holding its breath. She lifted her head, her throat raw from screaming, and in the smoke and broken light she saw it, the shadow, or what was left of it. Torn, twisted, staggering, but not gone. Her eyes widened, her nails digging into the soil as the realization struck: he had burned himself nearly to nothing, and still it wasn't enough. The silhouette across the clearing swayed, darker than night, and in its hollow core burned a faint ember, feeding, recovering. Her heart pounded as rage and despair clashed in her chest. "You don't get to take him and live," she whispered, voice sharp as glass. Then she felt it, the ember in her own chest, the fire he had given her when their souls collided in that last desperate blaze. Her palms lit faintly, golden veins crawling to her fingertips. She staggered to her feet, unsteady but unbroken, facing the shadow with a tear-streaked face and eyes blazing brighter than the dawn. The shadow's ember pulsed like a heartbeat, each throb stronger than the last, as if mocking her grief. Anna's legs trembled, but she planted them firmly in the torn soil, forcing air into her lungs, forcing herself to stand tall. The memory of his